Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here tonight. And I'm so honored to be on the stage with these two incredibly visionary leaders. Thank you, Alok. Thank you, Max, for joining us this evening. And I'm looking forward to a very fulsome and very engaging conversation throughout. But let's start with the first question to Alok. Alok, how did you and Max meet? And tell us a little bit about your friendship and connection over the years.
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting us. Really appreciate it. Ida, thank you. Thank you to, well, everyone for being here. Max and I think that's a little anecdote in my book. As I recall, we met surreal setting in Jerry Yang's home in Hawaii, in his kitchen, actually. We happened to be seated next to each other. We didn't necessarily choose each other as companions, but just so it happened. And my first recollection of Max is him trying to tell me in his own inimitable way. I must have told him I was a math major. He tried to give me a mathematical proof that there was at least a 50% likelihood that we were living in a simulation. Which is a fairly typical Valley kind of conversation. But as we talked, we discovered we had this bizarre fascination with this movie called The Big Lebowski. And then as we went on, we realized we were both huge Pink Floyd fans, and we went on to talk about Pink Floyd and Nabokov. And it's funny, it's sort of ironic. Max and I, we chat mostly on WhatsApp, and it's lovely when we actually get together. But the one thing we almost never talk about is technology. So it's it's kind of interesting to be here, and I look forward to it.
Alok, boy, I have to tell you, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during that discussion. That's for sure. Max, tell me, Alok actually said to me that you are the smartest person that he knows in the Valley. No pressure.
That's just like your opinion, man.
Walk us through your journey so far, and including the firing of Elon Musk.
I'll give you the condensed version of the Chronicles of Levchin. Born and raised in Kiev, Ukraine, moved to Chicago as a teenager, finished growing up there, went to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which was very lucky because Mosaic, which became Netscape, which gave birth to a lot of the technology that Alok and I have found ourselves entangled in, was created on my campus the year I matriculated. And so I got this front row seat to the future completely incidentally. Right after college, moved to Silicon Valley, started a bunch of companies before they all failed, started one more right after I moved to Silicon Valley. That one happened to be called PayPal. And that part is well written, but midway through PayPal's independent journey, we merged with another company called X.com, the original X.com, not the current X.com. Although, fun fact, Elon owned that domain when he named his startup X.com and then bought it back from PayPal, which was not using it, to use it again for Twitter. So this Elon and X have this entanglement that's almost mythical. The merger did not go well. It was a 50-50 merger, never do that again. You don't know who won, who lost, and both sides thought, of course, the other one should be listening to them. That one is also very well covered. It was a bit of a board coup. I was involved, not on Elon's side, obviously. The board pushed Elon out, reinstalled Peter Thiel, and eventually we lived happily ever after. The cool thing about this story that's probably worth mentioning, and I apologize if I'm offending someone's well-established view of Elon Musk. So he and I didn't speak for a couple of years. He was on our board. He would sit in the corner, sneer at me, and he perceived me as a primary protagonist or antagonist in this firing. On the day we went public, he texted me and said, "Hey, let's go get lunch." And sort of went to see him, and we had a lovely Singaporean meal, or Singaporean cuisine, obviously, meal at a place called Straits Cafe in Palo Alto, which no longer exists, but was wonderful then. And I asked him, "So, what can I do for you?" He said, "Well, I think it's time to bury the hatchet." I said, "I mean, I don't want to be looking to give that horse in the mouth here, but I fired you, and you didn't like me very much for that." He said, "Yeah, but it's been 2 years. Screw it, man. Let's just, move on." To this day, he has never brought that up. He has never held a grudge. He put it aside, and so on. So there's a million things people love to, as my teenagers say, hate on But the man's got a big heart.
That's great. Max, so tell us about your journey from then to where you are now with Affirm.
Between then and Affirm, a few other things transpired. We don't talk about them. But my wife, who's here in the audience, pointed out during the transpiration of those things that I'm really pretty much good at one thing, and that is starting financial services companies. Everything else that I tried before and after failed. That's actually a factual observation. And so she encouraged me to go start another financial services company, which I did. That was 13 and a half years ago, and I've been running it ever since. I'm not sure I'm good at it, but she's right that I'm not better at anything else. And so
So far.
There's hope for me yet, as we both married up and are reminded of that fact every once in a while. But I'm here representing my brand.
I can see that. He's wearing the Affirm socks as well.
And the very short pitch for Affirm is actually looking back to an even earlier era of my life where I just moved to the US. I had no idea how credit worked, and very promptly got myself into a whole bunch of trouble with credit cards. And reviewing financial services of my life in my then late 30s, I thought, it would have been great if somebody did a better job building a credit card that didn't seem to have hidden its business model in its fine print. So maybe I should go start a company that does that. And that's what we did, and it's now quite large and doing well.
So it's a global payments.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's ridiculous because it competes with PayPal among other things, and so it's a bit of a send off to my earlier self. But yeah, it's a payments company that deals both in payments and credit, and specifically competes with credit cards.
So Alok, you wrote the book, The Money Trap, and we're excited because Alok's going to sign some of his books for us after the conversation today. I had the pleasure of reading the book. I found it absolutely thrilling, and I can see why it was top of the charts for such a long period of time, Alok. So tell me, The Money Trap, you talk about the highs, the lows of tech investing, the challenges therein. Why did you write the book? And tell me, how'd you come up with the title of the book?
Yeah, why I wrote the book is an interesting story. I mean, I always had this itch, sort of a closet ambition, I guess is the right way to describe it, is to write. And late in life, in fact, even when I was at SoftBank, my last couple of years, I was toying with this idea. I enrolled at NYU to do an MFA in creative writing. And people assumed I did that with the intention of writing this book, which is actually not the case at all, because I never read executive memoirs. In fact, I never read business books because most of them are boring. And I think most people who write those kind of books are better off just doing a podcast or a blog or something. But as as one does in an academic context, I experimented, and I kind of realized that, or people pointed out to me that a lot of what I'd seen is, well, it's not normal. Anything but, and kind of the notion of someone with a writerly eye for observation talking about these insane deals or $5,000 bottles of wine or flying private or whatever, it would make for interesting reading. And then it was what I went through with this bizarre smear campaign, which kind of is a theme that runs through the book. A lot of personal events in my life. I mean, there was a period in which I lost both my parents. That juxtaposed with the arc of Masayoshi Son, larger-than-life character, absolutely fascinating. And kind of found a way to mesh those two and write it in a way that I think has a narrative arc, reads a bit like a novel. So. That's how the book came about. The Money Trap, my publisher came up with the title. I wasn't wild about it. It rhymes with honey trap, and actually, if you can believe, there is, you laugh, but this is, in the book, there actually is an attempt at sexual blackmail. So there's that. But equally, I mean, a lot of people who read the book kind of look at the title and they immediately say, yeah, I get it. I'm in that money trap. And you've been in this business, Ida. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, it's people. Indeed. It's people like us, and I was caught up in it, being in that cycle of bonuses, money, more money, which is just very, very tough to walk away from. So that's a little bit of what I was trying to get at.
I enjoyed reading about you getting a gift for your wife, a piece of jewelry after every bonus, and the Latashes and the private jets and all of it was really fascinating. Now, but you know, one thing I observed when I was reading the book is that there were little to no references to women, only a fleeting reference to Ruth Porat. So do you think that's something that's prevalent in the industry today and still needs a bit of a jolt there?
Yeah, no, I want to get Max's views on this too. And that's, I mean, look, this book is reality, and that is reality, sadly. I'd make 2 points. One is absolutely it is changing, and I think, and I'm sure Max will say the same, what I experienced at SoftBank and what I've seen since I'm associated with Warburg Pincus as a senior advisor, and I think that's absolutely true for them, is whether it's in a promotion context or in a recruiting context, in a tie, the nod always goes to the woman, and I think that's really healthy. In my view, and a lot of people will agree with this, that's not a nod to DEI or it's not decorative. I'm a firm believer that that the world would be a better place. Businesses would be run better. Countries would be run better if you had women in positions of power and influence. And a simple reason, not to pick on Elon Musk, but you know, men let egos get in the way of making decisions. And Elon, to me, is a prime example. I mean, I refer to this in the book. I mean, the stuff that went down with him and Zuckerberg, and actually, I'm sorry to drag this conversation down, the notion of challenging him to a dick measuring contest, which is just like, come on, man. With Sam Altman, the same thing, the shots they were taking at each other. Yeah. That's just petty and gets in the way of sensible decisions. So I think the world, and I know this is not a hope, it's not a prayer. 5 to 10 years down the road, it's going to look very different. And I think that's a great thing.
Very promising. Max, your thoughts?
I guess the cage match between the two of us is also not happening here tonight. So fun statistic. When I matriculated at U of I, my freshman computer science class was about 1,000 people. It's a big state school. I believe there were 2 girls in the CS major, CS engineering. I happen to be pretty closely involved with my alma mater. The current state of affairs is 52% are women in the CS major. And so we're living through a period of time. So by the way, there's lots of asterisks there. One, will they all go into industry the way I did? Will they graduate in computer science, become managers or investment bankers or who knows? But in terms of the doors are closed and the keys are hidden among men, that's not true anymore. Like they've been burst open, and those who want to go, if anything, fun fact, I established a scholarship in my grandmother's name at U of I and attempted to, for computer science majors, and attempted to make it only available to women, and was struck down on Title IX grounds. So I was told that it's not possible, it has to be equally distributed. So, and when I looked at the statistics, I was like, they're kind of right. Like there's not really a shortage of girls trying to start computer science degrees. I think we're living through a period of time where educationally and access-wise, we're no longer constrained. The choices they make and the interplay between family and there are such things as biological constraints. If you're thinking of starting a family and having one, you're not, you know, there are methods now you can freeze eggs and all that good stuff. And I have a side gig in fertility, so this is actually a kind of a fertility data science. But it's a topic that's quite interesting, and I do think we'll be in a better place. The real question is what happens once all the access is available, and what do people actually choose to do? But I think the choices are becoming available, and the next generation will really have whatever they want.
That's super positive news, and I can't help but to interject and say that women today control 1/3 of global wealth, and in the next 5 years, they're going to control over 50% of global wealth. That has massive ramifications for what we're talking about here, but I think very positive ramifications in the coming years ahead, all across the board. And so, Max, let me then double click on something with you. You've built such transformative, innovative companies. How do you build companies with the speed and agility needed when everyone's pushing for growth, but do that responsibly, given all of the considerations around the world, geopolitically, safety, and otherwise? How do you do that? How do you balance the two?
I think the shortest answer is culture. Like ultimately, so when I was younger, I used to have a very hard time understanding why would people write down things like mission statements and core values, and if anything, I'm like, oh, the motivational speakers, the motivational posters, and on the walls. Gosh, silly. As you age, you realize that there are many turnoffs on the highway of growth, and some of them lead to scary places. And you don't just want to build for the sake of building and speed for the sake of speeding. And plenty of people are and find themselves in situations they probably didn't want to be in. And so starting this one, I wrote down a mission statement and a set of core values and committed to keeping them exactly word for word as they were. It's been 13 years, haven't had to change anything. I think that's a huge part of how you remind your team, your managers, your rank and file employees every day, here's why we're here. There is a moral agenda to what we do. It doesn't have to be everyone's moral agenda, it could just be ours, but you better believe there's a higher purpose to what you're doing. And if there isn't one, two things will happen. One, everyone will know that it's hollow on the inside and it's just money. That's the shell. Money doesn't fill the space, it just creates a comfortable surrounding. And so if it's hollow on the inside, what will happen in a tough moment, the sphere will burst and the emptiness will become apparent. And so what gets you through tough points in building a company is a sense what it can deflate again, but the core is stable and it's always been here. And the morality of the mission is what gets you through those difficult moments. So in every single entrepreneur, incidentally, that I have seen successfully navigate ups and downs, in the end, they know why they're working. And 1A isn't to get rich, it's to do something. It doesn't always have to be change the world, just be to make a life better, maybe many more than one life better.
And importantly, the shadow that you cast as the leader of the business is incredibly important too. But I totally agree with you.
You have to, I believe you have to lead by example. I think
Absolutely.
People we know that are truly great at this business, they all lead by example.
Yep, absolutely. Alok, you had a front row seat to Masayoshi Son's world. Tell us about that. I mean, you've worked so closely with him for so many years. What was that like working with him?
I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, I had my ups and downs, obviously. But I think the best way to understand Masa is actually listen to him describe himself. And he calls himself he wears it as a badge of honor, but he calls himself crazy. And he wants to be remembered as the crazy guy who bet on the future. Now, what does he mean by that? Because it's interesting to unpack that. He's had an uncanny track record now spanning 4 decades of looking around corners, of identifying successfully technology megatrends. So SoftBank, its origins are, SoftBank means a distributor of software. People assume it's a financial institution. It's not. So SoftBank started as a bank for software, a distributor of Microsoft software in Japan, which was again on Masa foreseeing the PC revolution. And then of course, where he really kind of made a dent in the universe in sort of Valley speak, Steve Jobs' words, I guess, is through the internet. And that, he was in very early. We talked about Jerry Yang. He backed Jerry Yang with $100 million when the company was nothing in 1996 on Yahoo. And at one point, Masa owned 8% of all internet stocks and was briefly richest man in the world ahead of Bill Gates. Now, he didn't get out in time, but that's not taking away, you can't take away the fact
famous
that
for being the person who lost the most money ever.
he lost the most money ever, and guess who broke that record? We keep coming back to Elon Musk. It was Elon Musk.
Yes.
Right? Difference is Elon made it back in, I think, like 3 or 4 months. But anyhow, so he did that. And then, AI is all the hype right now.
Yes.
But when I first started working with Son back in 2014, it's all he would talk about. Singularity is coming. And, the Vision Fund, kind of the whole, from his perspective, he was too early, obviously. But the whole notion was, the AI wave is coming. I want to be ready for it. So this notion of craziness, people kind of talk about him as if he's this inveterate risk taker, he's a gambler, and absolutely, he is a huge risk taker, but it's not gambling, because if you think about, kind of what I went through, he's had this ability to now peer into the future, right? Smartphones, another thing, is better on Vodafone Japan. If you can sort of read tomorrow's headlines, and in his head, it's as good as like, I know this is going to happen. The level of conviction is so high. In his head, it's not a gamble. right? So it's not, it's that level of conviction that I think completely sets him apart. Now, people often ask me, what can you learn as an investor from Son? And my answer is absolutely nothing. Do not try and copy this man. I mean, because he's one of a kind. And he's been successful, and the track record speaks for itself. He was down and out. People wrote him off. He wrote himself off, but then he came back with ARM. His mark-to-market gain on ARM Holdings is over $100 billion. What I think you can learn from his life story is resilience. The number of times he has been written off and frankly pilloried and bounced back is actually quite remarkable. And I think I'm sure Max will agree. I mean, from an entrepreneurial perspective, that's just, it's to be admired, and it's
so much grit,
essential
so much
quality.
resilience, so much agility there. It's incredible. Now, I thought that he was known for wanting everybody to be happy.
Wow,
happy
so
person.
that's the interesting thing. If you get on SoftBank's website today, the corporate mission, it sounds bizarre, and it is happiness for everyone. And I guess it doesn't sound quite so strange translated into Japanese, but what Son is really getting at is the notion of using technology to improve people's lives, which is presumably doing more than just social media. And I think he has a very kind of techno-utopian idealist view of AI. And so that's, when I met him, I was a little bit cynical about this, but he means it. I mean, I've lived with a guy, and this notion, kind of this goes back to Edison and the light bulb, technology improving people's lives. He believes it.
That's great. So shifting gears for a moment, I'd love to get both of your perspectives on Project Stargate.
I'm happy to go. I think I think Stargate is. I have to say I saw it coming. I'll tell you why. It has elements of everything that Masa has been about for quite some time. It's AI, obviously. The technology angle is NVIDIA as a technology partner, but the other technology partner is ARM, and he's repositioned ARM to be a designer of chips, intelligent chips at the edge of the network, the edge being in cars and in smartphones. And the third dimension, which I don't think people appreciate, is energy, because these AI data centers consume massive amounts of energy. And while I was there, I was on the board of SoftBank Energy, which was one of the biggest generators of solar power in the world, right? So it's got all these elements that kind of come together. What I think has been mischaracterized is Stargate is being politicized. I think this is something, it's not like Son woke up and said, Trump's president, I got to do something like this. No, I mean, this is something he was set on, and this is not some US government-led initiative. I thought it was absurd some journalists described it as a Manhattan Project, which struck me as being absurd. I mean, a Manhattan Project where your lead partner is Japanese. I mean, come on, it's sort of ironic. It's kind of ridiculous. So the lead investor, the lead partner is Japanese. It's SoftBank. Another lead investor is from the UAE, MGX, and a technology partner is ARM, which is a British company, right? So this is it is in SoftBank's and Masa's sweet spot. Makes a ton of sense. There is right now a huge supply-demand imbalance when it comes to compute capacity. Is that going to change? It's going to move around. But I think a great parallel is I lived through, which was the biggest boom-bust cycle in 99, 2000. It wasn't internet, it was telecommunications, right? And for a period of time, people overbuilt, they overestimated capacity, fiber optic capacity, but eventually they were right. And I think there's going to be shades of the same. So there might be a supply-demand mismatch, but I think eventually that vision's spot on.
Max, any thoughts from you?
I think the analysis is exactly right. The interesting technical questions worth asking, I think ultimately the need to train is limited, the need to infer is infinite. There's a bunch of questions that are being answered in labs and companies today, right now, by very smart researchers. Can you infer at the edge? Can your car predict the next token as well as some data center in a cloud? If the answer, and I suspect the real answer is something in between, where some things can only be done centrally and many others will be done locally. Depending on the weight of the central inference, this will be a faster payoff. And if it turns out that you can DeepSeek distill large models into smaller, less computationally, energetically demanding ones, it will take longer. But I agree that this has all the echoes of the sort of we have so many cables, we don't know what to do with them. And then at some point, my internet is too slow again because we've used up all the cable available. So it's infrastructure for foundational things that we are not ever going to write off. Like the fiber optic cable under the Pacific today is going to be in use until it rots, not because we're going to find something else.
Max, Alok was just talking about booms and busts. What are the signals that you look for when you see like some of the speculation kind of, innovation starting to cross into speculation, and how do you sort of spot those early on?
When the explanations of why something is valuable take more than a couple of seconds, they're probably convincing themselves. So somebody tells you, this 25 by 25 pixel image is a work of art and is worth $1 million. Like, you should sell it as quickly as possible for $1 million. And so I think that's I think in retrospect, these things are all painfully obvious, and the only sort of real-time filter you should apply is, do I feel a little bit silly explaining this to my parents? And if the answer is yes, it's probably a bubble.
I think it's not even, I actually think that bubbles, not just retrospectively, even when you're in a bubble, they're easy to identify. They're impossible to trade.
Yeah.
And my favorite example actually is from financial markets. It's just a great story. Julian Robertson.
Yes.
You'd be familiar with Julian, founder of the Tiger franchise, and arguably one of the greatest public market investors of our times. And Julian called the internet bubble right. Problem was he called it in 1998. And he went light on internet stocks. He went short the markets, hopelessly underperformed, and ended up liquidating the entire fund. Again, one of the greatest investors of our time, liquidating, kind of getting out of the investment business, the hedge fund business in March of the year 2000. And the bubble burst right then, right? I mean, so that's a kind of a, not poignant, I mean, I won't feel sorry for Julian, but he got a very, he passed away sadly, very rich, very successful, left behind a fabulous legacy. But I think if you look at what's going on now, I don't believe there's a bubble in public markets. NVIDIA, I guess, is the poster child, but if you look at NVIDIA, again, kind of the historic parallels are very interesting. I look at Cisco at the height of the internet bubble, trading at 200 times earnings, and NVIDIA at its peak is traded at less than 40 times earnings. And by the way, you look at a company with 75% margins and not a competitor in sight, right? I mean, it's someday, sometime, but it's enviable market position, enormously profitable going. That's not outrageous. What I do wonder is when I see people, my favorite example is safe superintelligence, or now you have, I forget what it's called, Thinking Machines Lab, I think, $2 billion, seed round, $2 billion at a $10 billion valuation, right? Again, you go back to Ilya Sutskever, who was one of the founders of OpenAI, his seed round, $1 billion, $5 billion valuation, I would have said that was silly. But now he's doing another round, $2 billion at a $32 billion valuation, as far as I can tell. I don't know if he actually has, he certainly doesn't have revenue, neither of them. I'm not sure they have a product either. And you got to put that in perspective. Now, you might say, these are like giants of the business. Well, so is Max. And he's been at it for, Max, 12 years with Affirm, right? And approaching profitability this year, next year.
This year.
Right? And Affirm is worth $12 billion, give or take, right? I mean,
it depends on the day these days.
But you got to put that in perspective, right? In private markets, when people start paying you $32 billion valuations, $10 billion valuations, when you barely have a business plan, that gets to be a little bit silly.
They are illiquid, and that's the beginning of your point. Yeah, like you couldn't trade that $32 billion.
No, you can't. No.
No, so a share may be so scarce that.
From a global lens, if we take a step back and look at the global lens, look at all the challenges that investors face in today's marketplace, the number one risk is always geopolitical risk. We've got effectively a trade war happening between the US and China, the first and second largest economies in the world. And that is changing a lot of the behaviors and the supply chains and the opportunities around the world as well. I mean, you both know that China has invested a lot in AI and tech and digital robotics, et cetera, over the years. So where do you see, from a global investor standpoint, the geographic opportunities? Alok, you shared with me the India opportunity as well. But what do you see as patterns of flow over the coming years and decade ahead?
Yeah, I don't think India really features in that debate, to be quite honest. I mean, India features prominently in my book, and it features prominently for a while anyway with Masayoshi Son's investment strategy. But for Masa, India was all about what he called the time machine strategy, which is literally taking models, Uber or Amazon, for example, that have been enormously successful in the Western world, and planting them in India, and they're likely to be exponentially more successful in India because you don't have any legacy infrastructure to disrupt, right? India doesn't have organized retail, et cetera. There's been nothing of note in India by way of technology that's made an impact anywhere else in the world. China is different. I mean, the US is obviously miles ahead, but to me, the only two geographies in the world that have kind of made some kind of impact would be, I guess, the UK. Arm is one example, born out of Cambridge. DeepMind, if it was a public company today, I think it's a safe bet, would probably be worth over $100 billion. I mean, like Google bought it very early, but that came out of UCL in London. So I think there's pockets in the UK specifically, less so in Europe. And China. I mean, you've had BYD. I haven't diligenced it, but the notion of battery charging in, I don't know what the number is, 5 minutes, half an hour, whatever. That sounds pretty cool. DeepSeek was very cool. So there is some innovation in China, but in our lifetime, it's all about the US. It's all about the Valley.
Max, as someone who effectively invented fintech, where is the industry going?
I'm not that old. I believe it goes back to 1600s or so. So fintech was very much out of favor for a little while. So if you looked at my valuation as a publicly traded company, which we have 5 years worth of records there, for a little while it was all the rage. Weren't quite NVIDIA multiples, or certainly not early Cisco multiples, but it was unhealthy, healthy maybe is the right word, in quotes. It then got sold off into oblivion because it turned out that the only people who could do technology when finances are involved are banks. That is not true. It turns out that there's some news written on that, and things have normalized since then. I think we're about to see another round of really clever ideas, having adjusted for that knowledge that some things are meant to be done by banks and others are not. And that's a very boring answer, but I suspect a truthful one. And so every time I look at a neobank play in the US, sort of ask myself, is this going to be like Nubank, which is a stunningly successful company in LATAM, or like a long list of dead neobanks that sort of tried and didn't work out in this country? Probably a more interesting comment on fintech, and I sort of referred to it a little bit earlier in jest. It's not clear to me we are migrating towards any sort of financial services with cryptocurrency, even though we're monetizing the bleep out of cryptocurrency in all kinds of interesting new ways. And some ways, fortunately, like the 25 by 25 pixel stuff is going away, but there's real value. There are ETFs now. You can buy all sorts of baskets of crypto, even if you have no idea how to hold a cold storage wallet. And so I think we're still finding our way through this fintech world. We've gone through the anything that has a fintech label on it is worth $1 trillion to nothing could possibly be worth more than a penny to wait a second, some things are useful and other things are not. And some things are particularly appealing if you are a depository holding or deposit holding institution, and some things don't require it. And the ones that don't require it are the ones that I think most interesting. Banking infrastructure is hard to compete with, and it's fundamentally local. Ultimately, people still go down to the corner bank. And so that, to me, is the area where innovation has sort of come to die a bunch of times, and maybe will continue to do so.
If you were going to start another company today, what problem would you try to tackle, Max?
I made a list of things before my wife set me straight, but so my personal sort of North Star is maximizing number of lives I can improve in the world. And that sounds grandiose, but it's a really easy way of measuring. If you have a number of people whose lives you somehow improved, then you're probably doing something right, and the number is really big, that you're doing something really right, et cetera. And so what can you do that sets that up for real impact? Food, water, energy, education, finance. Those are the 5 that I could list out. And I started with the one I ended up doing. That's because I have maybe the only one I'm qualified to do. I have kids now, and education probably would be in that area. I think education and AI are slated for an intersection that'll either be explosive and not in a good way, or explosive and in an amazing way. And before we get to brain implants that just tell us the answers, we don't have to learn them, will be another, who knows, maybe 5 to 10 years, perhaps longer, of AI as a teacher, AI as a co-learner, AI as a homework partner, and there's an infinite supply of product ideas that just kind of jump off the page as you read the latest papers and ideas on AI. And so I would go there because it's sort of first level impact. Had I had any background in chemistry or biology, I would go for water. I think we're looking at wars over water 10, 15, 20 years from now, and that's scary, and somebody should be doing something.
I totally agree with you, by the way, that education will get disrupted. We've been talking about that for quite some time. Alok, what about yourself?
I'm actually working on writing another book, so I'm no one for starting companies anyway. But from my perspective, for me, it was more of a spectator sport, I guess. But the technology I have been most excited about is the convergence of biology and AI and what that means for precision medicine and drug discovery. That is, and I've invested behind that too, very long gestation. It's not just coming up with a molecule or a it's the testing process, the approval process, very long lead times. But in terms of, kind of judging by the same standards in terms of impact on humanity, the ability to improve lives. I'm talking about, kind of personalized vaccines to get at cancer. I think that is going to become a reality soon. And I think is going to have an extraordinary impact. In fact, if you want to think about, kind of the most positive things you can say about AI, which for me is mostly so far a productivity tool, but in terms of genuinely making a tangible impact on lives, I think that's pretty cool.
It can't come soon enough, that's for sure. So Alok, Max, you're both incredibly inspirational leaders, and I know we have an audience both in the room today and globally via webcast, wondering what are some of the most important leadership lessons that you could impart on this group tonight?
I was going to say, you go first, man. You wrote a book.
Not about leadership.
I work for a living. It's all about people. Until AI can do it all for you, people you surround yourself with, compromises you don't make, choices you make about who you spend the hours or years in the trenches with, that's what ultimately makes or breaks the companies, so, and any groups really. And any time you think otherwise, you've sort of forgotten the important lesson you already know. I think that's probably 1 through 7 of important 10 business lessons. I'll give you enough time to think.
I don't know if my friend Vic is there. He wrote a book about leadership, but anyhow, no. I mean, I think so much has been said about the subject. The only thing I'd share is my journey as a manager. The one quality that's been fed back to me is something that has worked is transparency. And I think again, you relate to this, Ida, in the investment banking world, in particular, bonus cycles, for example, they're shrouded in mystery. And that's just one example of, in terms of the way I've conducted myself, is just practice complete transparency. And I mean, I've always had a reputation for being someone who kind of gives it to you straight and and compensation is just but one example, which is, here's where you stand, here's where the person next to you stands, and here's why. And it's interesting, even when the message is tough, people really, really appreciate it. So I think that's a quality that's, so I've been told anyway, has served me well.
Wonderful. So we've learned transparency, directness of communication. We've learned leading by example, the culture. You talked about so much, Max, that's so important to the values of a company and the way that culture is in the companies. We heard from Alok about Masayoshi-san's views on agility, resilience, grittiness, despite all the challenges that happen. So thank you to the two of you so much for the conversation thus far. I want to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions of what's on their mind. So I know that we've got some microphones throughout the auditorium here, and by all means, you can just raise your hands. I can't see anyone because the lights are so bright, so I'm going to need a little bit of help here with the navigation. I do see a hand in the back of the room. If you could please state your name and ask the question, please. Thank you.
Is the U.S. on a defensive in technology? Oh, well. So my question, hello? So my question is, with the U.S. decision to do a lot of barriers to entry for EV cars coming to the U.S. and blocking chips to China, is the U.S. on the defensive for technology innovation right now?
I think you're combining politics, national security, and sort of the actual state of innovation. I am certainly not qualified to comment on national security and even less qualified to comment on politics. The state of US research and quality of things that are being invented here is extraordinary. I think we are in no danger of being outrun or out-innovated, whether any of the tariffs, blocks of technology transfer, foreign investment, lack of foreign investment, all of that, those are all sort of, my thought would be relatively temporary bumps, and maybe bumps for us, maybe bumps for our partners and or adversaries, maybe both. But at least in this moment, if there was a single thing I would worry about in terms of US being on the offensive, to use your terminology, or to being ahead as innovators, it's anytime you have someone with a sufficiently high GPA and a really good diploma from a quality US university and no right to live and work in the US, stamp a green card to that diploma. Like that would be a single policy that I would advocate for. It would simplify a lot of things in terms of brain drain, in terms of innovation in the US. But even without it, I think we're doing okay, just judging by what US universities are printing out in terms of quality research.
Just building on that, by the way, I wrote a piece in the Times in London about this because it is something I feel quite strongly about. So I spent a little bit of time in India in connection with the book. And I was, I'm in touch with India, with tech generally. I must admit I was out of touch with youth in India, and I was taken aback by, people assume India is booming, you want to stay there, build businesses. I was taken aback at the notion that everyone's dream was coming to America, right? I mean, that dream is that's the end game for people. And a lot of people reacted to my book as something that's purely aspirational, which is this guy came from middle-class family, he's just like us, I can relate to him, and he did well in America. And that's a very big deal. And this is just echoing what Max said, we were both immigrants, Max obviously in the technology space. I just would not underestimate how extraordinary that is. And the notion, when I see some of the silliness around, the context of my piece, was a friend of mine, someone who is now Trump appointed the AI czar, Sri Ramakrishnan, and a lot of people targeted him as like, why do we need an Indian dude doing this? I just thought that was absurd. That is what has been at the heart of American innovation, and to turn your back on that that's a much bigger risk than terrorists or anything else.
I mean, you're looking at the American dream on the stage here, right? Other questions in the audience? I see some hands over here. If we could get some microphones on the left side of the auditorium.
Hi, I'm Iman Tawassoli, physician, scientist, entrepreneur, and working on digital health. I want to ask Alok, because you mentioned about like the possibility and potentials in precision medicine and AI. I wanted to know your point of view. What are the obstacles, and how long do you think it will take to bring like a AI-based platform to reality in precision medicine?
Oh man, you're going to burn out my knowledge on this very, very quickly. No, you probably know more about this than I can. I mean, I think, look, I do have people who I've invested alongside who I respect a lot, and these things just take a very long time, as they should. And I think a lot of it is just the testing process and rolling out the trials. So I don't know. I mean, I think the technology, a lot of the technology exists today. Commercial availability is probably 5 years away. But look, I don't want to position myself as an expert on the subject. I'm sure you know more than I do.
What I can comment on there is that the disruptive technologies and AI that's happening in the healthcare industry are creating so much opportunity for longevity that our children are going to live well past 100. That'll be the norm, and that the average age expectancy is going up by a decade. Now, because of the advancements in telemedicine, personalized medicine, drug discovery, the robotics, and the elements there that we didn't have. I mean, just imagine that you can do a whole workup on yourself and know what you're prone to and do preventative medicine early on. So that's where the world's headed, and that has, again, massive ramifications for longevity, aging, health going forward. So I think this is an incredibly exciting space and one to be watched, because I think it's happening a lot sooner than anyone anticipates. In the middle.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm an investor at Viking Global, so always very good to hear Julian spoke fondly of. I'm curious to the extent that you think there is a constraint on like how much AI gets better, if that's power, if that's data, if that's compute, or to the extent there is no constraint, like what the timeline is for something like AI starting to cause material rise in the unemployment rate.
For AI to cause a material change in the unemployment rate? Oh boy, I think that's, Max, I don't know if you agree, disagree. I think that's happening as we speak.
Is.
It's
The
happening.
displacement of labor is very real.
Yes.
On a massive scale.
It's the strongest bull case for startups you can imagine, in the sense that, so first of all, it is happening, and the productivity of 10x engineers becoming 100x engineers because they're offered AI-powered tools is like that. That's here today. My company benefits from it. Every company I know benefits from it. So it's already happening. But the good news is that for centrally planned economy-like companies, fill in your favorite industrial, they look at these technologies and say, oh, wow, finally, I don't have to replenish these workers that are quitting, or maybe I can do a little layoff on the fly, and maybe if my competitors do a layoff, I can do a layoff too. So they're seeing this as a cost-saving mechanism. If you look at a roadmap of majority of startups, and I consider Affirm, with our billions of revenue, et cetera, very much a startup, because the red line of we can't afford to build anything below this number, that the length of that to-do list vastly outstrips what we have planned to build, because there are too many ideas and not enough people. From my point of view, it's an opportunity to hire a few more people, not as many as I could possibly hope to hire, but I don't need to anymore because I can actually get more done with AI. So productivity on a per human basis will go up. And not every company is going to benefit. There will be short positions to be had on the dinosaurs that will look at it and say, well, we just need to fire some people and see if we can keep our costs down that way. But many, many companies will look at AI tools and say, this is actually a reason to invest in more human capital. You have to be good enough. And so there will be a natural selection process where some people will find themselves unable to use the tools, but that's most of the time a choice they'll have to make. They'll have to catch up with the times. But most companies I can think of are looking at AI as a force multiplier on their best people and asking themselves, is there a few more great people we can get that would get on these tools and go that much faster? So the value will accrete to the nimble significantly.
I would just add very quickly that, AI is touching currently about 20% of jobs today. It's unlocking lots of efficiency, as Max mentioned, but it's also creating new types of jobs, right? So it's about the training and the mentality around what and how we're going to unlock this powerful engine of efficiency globally. So don't forget, there are new jobs being created too by unlocking this power. It's not just net negative.
Yeah, the other thing is going to be a little while before AI can move atoms. And so if you wanted to find a safe haven of places where AI isn't going to take your job away, I would look into things that have physical manifestation. We're probably a decade away from robots that can actually do truly complex jobs with no human oversight.
Thank you for the time today. This is Nikki Lowe. I just have a very simple question. What keeps you up at night now, since you've achieved everything? For the most part, you are the immigrant's dream, right? So.
For me, it's easy. When you say achieved everything, I mean, I think I said it. I mean, I consider myself a writer, and I'm working on writing a book, and it'll frequently, if I'm up at night or I wake up in the middle of the night and I think of something I want to write that kind of works into my book, I kind of go down. That's literally what I'm living and breathing. I'm doing a bunch of things on the side, but it's probably not the answer you were looking for, but that's just my life. I mean, I'm not worried about AI taking over the world or a T2 or T3 kind of scenario or whatever. But
I just worry about being a good parent.
Well said.
Hi there. Thank you so much for insightful conversation. So I have a question. My name is Natalia, and I'm digital marketer. So it's about emerging trends in cryptocurrency. So what is your take about the US dollar and all these emerging trends is becoming more and more adopted throughout the globe? What's going to be next?
I think the most recent headlines on CNBC suggest that US dollar is being reconsidered in its position as a global reserve currency. So, although I think today we saw a little bit of retrenchment. Yeah, so we're better today, terrible yesterday. Can't remember the day before. I think the most interesting, and it's no longer big news, so this is not nearly as insightful an answer as it was maybe 3 months ago, but various forms of crypto or dollar-backed crypto, USDC, and all the various stablecoin ideas are actually turning out to be very cynical, the one useful transactional case for crypto. Crypto is a store of value. Crypto is a speculation device. Great, we've had it for over a decade. But USDC as a settlement mechanism for cross-border transactions, truly instant, no real complexity around FX, predictable, pretty good. This is, like Exhibit A in crypto is actually useful. So in that sense, cool. Otherwise, I mean, meme coins are still in the 25 by 25 pixel bucket for me.
I tell you what I don't get is the notion of the U.S. government promoting the notion of a crypto stockpile. I mean, it's not like a petroleum reserve or a nuclear warheads or something. I don't get that at all.
Where do they store it?
Sorry?
Where do they store it? Like, I want to visit the room where they stockpile it.
And by the way, I mean, the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. I don't know why you'd want to promote Bitcoin or anything else as an alternative. I mean, that to me is just self-defeating.
Question in the back.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sophia. I have a question not really so related to the topic today. But yeah, I'm curious. So if you could instantly master a new skills outside of technology or finance, what would be your first choice? Thank you.
Anytime. I would love to be funny.
I mean, I am working on what is for me a relatively new skill, writing. But I tell you, the one thing I would love to do is be a musician. I don't know, probably play the electric guitar, blues maybe.
There's another question in the back, or a few questions in the back.
I think we're back biased because we can almost see them.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to see.
Hi, my name's Ali. One of the questions I have is, I'm actually a student in finance currently, and since AI has been making a big jump in the finance industry as well as the tech industry, what are some aspects you guys think that like people should start focusing on if they want to make a jump start in the finance industry with AI coming in, like, you know, as a show of force?
In every industry where precise outcomes are valuable, finance is a good example. So there's math, software engineering, et cetera. The human role, I think, will shift more and more towards judgment and less towards being a successful operator of a calculator. So in your classes, in your time as you reflect on what you're actually working on, seek out those moments where you're forced to decide between a gray zone and another point in a gray zone versus what's the right answer. Like 10 years from now, the right answer will write itself because an AI will calculate it for you. But is A or B the right call? And there isn't an inherently, life is not a test. A lot of times you're making decisions based on imperfect information and ultimately a judgment of what may or may not work for this case. That's the skill that'll take quite some time for AI to master, in part because we don't always know what the right call is, and the responsibility will sit with you whether you made the decision or AI. And so judgment, I think, is the ultimate currency. That and creativity. I think if you look at sort of the industrial revolutions, which is the third one we're living through right now, the first one robbed us of the brawn. The next one, digital revolution, didn't rob us of the brain, but it sort of made braining a little bit less demanding, calculators and computers. This one is going to finish the job. We will not need to know math. It'll just know itself. But creativity and judgment and knowing what's beautiful and knowing what's right, that in your heart of hearts you know the answer, that's very far away. I'm not sure it'll ever happen until another major breakthrough in model design, and maybe never in our lifetime. So I think that part's still safe. You know, creativity in finance, it's not always a good thing, but I would look for those skills nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The thing I do worry about is, based on my own experience on Wall Street, is, you know, you don't need analysts, probably don't even need associates anymore on Wall Street, right? And you don't go straight from business school to becoming a managing director. I mean, it is a learning process, and I think that facility with analytics, building spreadsheets, I mean, that is, or even proofreading prospectuses, I mean, you know, kind of, these are skills, the detail orientation, the analytics. The notion that you could kind of skip over that is, I find that troubling. I just wonder if you can, Max is spot on, but I just wonder if you can deliver that judgment without having been through that
I didn't say,
process.
and so you don't need to study any of that stuff. If anything,
But I'm just saying it's a risk, right? Because it is like, you know, if you're at a bank, you know, kind of, and you've decided from a productivity perspective, I no longer need analysts, you're just using AI, then like, you know, how do you learn?
yeah, a good, maybe slightly technical example of exactly this idea. So AI today knows more computer science than any computer science student in the world can, because of course computer scientists
But
built
about
AI.
coding too,
Yeah, and so you can ask ChatGPT or your favorite AI implementation to help you solve an AI or a computer science problem. And it'll either write code for you, which is really dangerous because what if there's a bug? So a safer thing to do is you say, well, I'm going to write the code. I'm going to write the code with you, but first explain to me what the algorithmic solution is. So we're going to multiply two matrices. Well, you got to go row by row and then by column. There's many ways to do it. Some of them are really expensive computationally. Some of them are the right ways, and et cetera. When AI spits out an answer, even in the world where hallucinations are not a thing, you don't really know if that's the efficient answer. And so the baseline education in computer science that allows you to glance at the answer and say, that is the efficient solution. Thank you for reminding me, is a much safer universe than, I have no idea what you just said, but that looks good. Let's go put that to work. So I suspect you're exactly right. And the baseline education, the foundational education is important. One other bit, which is sort of an overused line, but deserves mentioning anyway, the thing that trains judgment is philosophy. I think you don't get to skip philosophy, period, like maybe never. And so I think that's another very safe area to invest your intellectual cycles in.
And just to add on to what both of them have already said, it's also incredibly important to be a voracious and open-minded lifelong learner. So be agile, be willing to adapt, be willing to learn in different and new ways, so that you can stay relevant, that you can stay on top of it. And in my business, which is wealth management, it's all about the human interaction. I don't believe we're going to be displaced by robots anytime soon. I know you said 10 years. I think in private banking, it's all about the gut, the feeling, the trust, the value, the emotion that when you're speaking with a client that you just can't replace with AI today. So listen, I think there's a lot to be said here, but definitely be open to learning and growing.
There will be some jobs left.
After the robot question in the back. Unless there's some in the front that I can't see, by all means.
There's one in the back, but hi. Thank you for the panel today. I'm Gloria. I'm currently working at eBay, actually in the ads side of the business. But I have a question just in terms of what makes technology investment different compared to invest in other side of the assets, such as secondary infrastructure or oil and gas and stuff like that. And then what makes a great tech investor?
You start with that. That one's for you.
No, I'm actually very happy to go with that. So I, math major, MBA in finance, Morgan Stanley, very kind of classic, nerdy corporate finance training, right? And I'd been a banker to the tech industry and had more than my fair share of that. My last 9 years at Morgan Stanley were focused on the TMT space. But being at SoftBank was really my first exposure to tech investing, early stage, growth stage. And in many ways, I had to unlearn a lot of what I'd picked up over, in my case, 25, 30 years, right? I'll give you an example. The first deal I did when I was at SoftBank is we invested in an Indian company called Ola Cabs, which is Uber of India now. There's Uber in India, but this was the same model. And I looked at that model, this is in 2014, I looked at the numbers, and I looked at it with a very analytical mindset, which is what's the size, how much are Indians spending on taxis, how much of that could be ride sharing, and then kind of you make some assumptions about market share, Uber, and there were a couple of other Indian competitors, and you make some assumptions about margins based on what people are paying, and you quickly conclude that this business is completely, totally worthless, and it's never going to be worth anything, analytically. That's what all my training taught me, right? And then I sit down with Son, I talked about, by the way, this guy had already raised around at 400 million, so if you wanted to invest, that was the starting point. You wanted 600, 700. And Masa's point was, look, whether we pay 400, 500, 600, doesn't really matter. This thing, in 10 years, I mean, think of a world where you have autonomous cars, no drivers. Right? So you go out and many of you will go out and you'll get an Uber, you spend $10 on an Uber, $7 goes to a driver. You take the driver out of the equation, that changes the business model completely. And the point Masa was making is, you can't really put a number on that, kind of when are these autonomous cars going to come around and what are the economics of autonomous cars. But the point was that if you've invested in a platform, that someday is going to be worth a lot. And that kind of big leap of faith you need to make is you're betting on technology, you're betting on an entrepreneur, that becomes a really crucial part of the discussion, the decision, way more than the analytics. I mean, in my book, I have this chapter on a dinner that Masa and I had with Mark Zuckerberg, which is kind of anecdotal, it's episodic, it's funny. But the main point of including that is Masa passed on Facebook because he thought the valuation was too high. It was $10 billion, right? And that, of course, was, people associate Masa with kind of never saw a deal, valuation, overpaying. But that was one example of valuation discipline. And I remember at dinner, he turns to me and to Nikesh, who was my boss and partner in crime there, and says, we should never make that same mistake again, right? So it is that kind of departure from analytics that's the most important difference.
Hi. Hi, my name is Alok, and I work at Citigroup. A quick question for Max, for you. We talked about Brazil, where new bank actually disrupted the banking industry. In UK, Revolut is doing the same. What has prevented the same level of disruption happening in US? Is the market different, or is there something else that we are missing out on?
It's a great question. Could take easily another panel at the same time. So I will limit myself to a few carefully chosen remarks. In the US, the regulatory environment, current times included, which may sound strange, but things are changing by the day, so who knows, is generally set up so heavily in favor of not just the legacy banking institutions, but also the largest of the legacy banks. And US is not unique. For example, in the UK, until the idea of what's called a sandbox charter, which is what Revolut ultimately exploited to get as big and successful as they were. And by the way, Revolut, if I remember correctly, took a long time to get to actual banking charter. It was a very arduous journey. Again, I'm not an expert on their history, but regulatory frameworks, the complexity of allowing a startup to manage people's deposits, it's not to be discounted. Like, you gather a bunch of deposits and then you decide to go bankrupt, people's livelihoods are going to be affected. And so regulators and legislators in this country certainly have been very, very careful to allow too much of that sort of thing to happen. That said, if you look at the results of today's fintech ecosystem, and sort of back to the question of what's happening in fintech, short of disrupting the actual deposit gathering, it's been unbelievably successful. My own sort of little attempts excluded, Stripe is on paper worth in the order of $100 billion. They processed north of $1 trillion of volume last year. Actually, maybe 2 years ago, that was a stat. There are plenty of really, really large-scale lending companies like mine that are all in the tens of billions of dollars. The buy now, pay later industry that I represent is still growing on average 25% per year off the back of about $100 billion total volume. So there are enormous forays into parts of banking that are taking place very, very successfully. And so not to be discounted, the stronghold in the US that hasn't really cracked, there's not a single giant of deposit gathering that has succeeded. Nothing compares to the likes of Chase or Citi or Bank of America in the startup world. And that may or may not be a good thing. Obviously, as an entrepreneur in the space, I wish for things to become easier so we can all go at it. But on the other side, you're protecting a couple 100 million households that have their savings inside banks that represent stability. There's a reason why these buildings are made of marble and have, big vaults that you can see. Like, you're supposed to feel safe with your money there. In places like, certainly UK with Revolut, and even more importantly in LATAM, and Nubank is not the only big player there. The infrastructure was poor and the regulatory regime was fairly indifferent, and the opening was there and they took it. So I think US is maybe a little bit behind, but not too far behind.
Thank you. My name is Diana. We are a media capital investor using advertising as an asset class. The question I have is for all three of you. What's the most counterintuitive thing that you've learned from decades of investments?
I think I already gave my answer. For me, it was lifetime of finance training thrown into an area where I'm kind of told that valuations don't really matter. I struggled with that.
I'm next. The most counterintuitive thing, I think that we oftentimes underestimate the power of being a great listener. And I judge success in many of the discussions and conversations that we have by how much the client does the talking and we do the listening. So I think that's a very interesting counterintuitive. You think you have to go in and present all the great ideas, but actually you hear and miss so much if you're not an active listener.
There's so many. The list is so long. I feel everything is flipped on its head. I think the importance of psychology. It's an old lesson at this point. I wouldn't be caught dead saying, "Oh yeah, psychology. Who cares?" But in college, I mocked my friends who majored in psychology because it was a placeholder major until they figured out.
Okay, I was a psychology major.
This was not rehearsed. But in a big house full of CS majors, mocking psychology majors wasn't difficult. And in retrospect, I should have read more. I should have taken psych classes, and I should have read as many psych books as possible. Ultimately, we are bizarrely irrational machines for making decisions. And if you understand that and sort of figure out what that really means in any given business or personal situation, you'll be far better off. And as a hard sciences nerd, I scoffed at it for far too long, but I'm better now.
Actually, Mac, completely agree with that. Just to build on that, I did say I never read nonfiction. The one book most of you have read it. If you haven't, it's a must read, is Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. I mean, that is one of those books where, man, if I read this when I was 21, I would have been so much better at everything I did. And that's all about psychology.
It came out when you were 25. So.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there one last question?
I see an arm in the back.
I see that, yep.
Scream. There are multiple arms there.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. We'll do you and then the question in the back, please. Yes.
Hello. Thank you so much. Fantastic, so insightful. Max, you mentioned water. You talked about wars being fought in 15 to 20 years over water, maybe even sooner. Maybe it's happening now. But data centers use a lot of water. Mukesh Ambani in India announced that he was going to build the biggest data center in the world next to his biggest oil refinery in the world, both of which take a lot of water. Do you see in your sectors, in your industries, that people care about the planet, care about the future of water, want to do something about water? Because, the planet we haven't talked about yet, climate, all those issues which have been brushed aside in America in the last 3-4 months. So it's a big deal, water, for data centers, for the future of AI.
I'll start, but I imagine you guys have your own points of view. So I will put all my cards on the table. I'm a techno-optimist. I very much believe that majority of our problems can and should be solved through technology. I think the thing preventing us from not being worried about water, we have a lot of water. Like if you look at the planet surface, there's a lot of blue, and we're okay on that front. It's not all drinkable. Majority of it, in fact, is not. And so desalination, which predates every technology and pre-technology era, goes back a couple thousand years, is a well-understood technology. The problem we have with desalination is we can't transport water quickly enough to the places where it's needed. And so fundamentally, solution to the water problem is primarily a fuel and cost of transport, and hopefully without polluting. And so, not to bore you with my own sort of little designs on what that might look like, the point is, these aren't problems that we need to or can't afford to stand in front of and say, what we need to do right now is wind down the data centers, stop generating electricity because nothing is more important than protecting the water that we have. Nothing's more important than making sure we don't run out of water, full stop, and hopefully not have wars over it. But the way to do it isn't to stop doing things, it's to do more things. So I'm all for data centers. I would prefer there would be a little bit less oil, if to flash my own politics, but all things kept equal, we'll solve these problems by inventing new things, not by trying to restrict the new things that we're doing, in my opinion.
Just to add on very quickly, we are in the midst of the largest wealth transfer in history right at this very moment. 100 trillion is passing to next-gen millennials and 30 trillion, as I mentioned earlier, to women. And what you're going to witness here is a huge support for the matters that you just mentioned, purpose-driven, impact-related investing. So I personally am very encouraged by the patterns and the shifts in behavior that I'm seeing globally from some of the most significant families around the world to support exactly what you have raised and what Max has just talked about, is this evolution of industries with a very purposeful and mindful intent on environment and other matters that impact the world in a positive way. Last question in the back.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for enlightening us today. My name is Samir Pochi, and I just wanted to ask if any of you guys are willing to mentor me. Thank you so much.
Sorry, what was that?
If any of you are willing to mentor him.
I think Alok is already doing this by writing. So if you haven't read his book, I think I've read the book. It's great, and I'm not just saying it because I'm in it. But to be completely honest, I cannot. I'm currently trying to attempt to learn how to mentor a 15-year-old who will not be mentored, and so my age qualifications are currently 15 or less.
Well, on that note, I want to thank Alok and thank Max so much for your insightful comments tonight. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely. So ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Alok and Max. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Thank you both.